Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020, order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15th. Sorry, I just had to close the pop-up. The Governor's March 15, 2020 orders imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the Southborough Capital Planning Committee - School Research Subcommittee will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information, the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and/or parties with a right and/or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the Town of Southborough's website at www.southboroughtown.com. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch or participate in the meeting may do so in the following manner by finding the meeting at www.southboroughtown.com/remote meetings. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on Southborough's website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. With that, Katura is coming. She thought it was 7:30. So if everyone's good, I'll just pause for a second because that way so Kathy, it sounds like we're going to have November 5th, December 10th, and January 13th meeting minutes tonight to review. Do you have any comments on the November 5th meeting minutes?
Sorry. No, I read them. They're perfect. So
okay. And Contora was the author of those, so I'll just check with her when she gets on. On all of them, the only change I had to the December 10th and November 5th one was town clerk asked us to remove the seal. I think it actually messes up how they scan them for ADA compliance. So I'm just gonna. They asked us when I submitted the last ones to come back and remove them. And then the only other thing was because Greg and Keith are technically not listed on the charge, I just put non-voting as opposed to calling them ex officio. It's really a technical thing, but I think we all know what contributions they're all both making in each meeting. But that was the only two items that I had to all of them.
On December 10th. That's what we're talking about now, is the 10th?
I was talking actually in general across the board because it impacted how Katura had written her minutes and how you had written your minutes for December 10th.
All right. So we've been putting that seal on for years. So I wonder why. Okay. So
So it's interesting that no one had given you that feedback when Andrew D was submitting the advisory ones, right? Because I think advisory has those.
So why are you distinguishing between ex officio and non-voting?
Or I could just put also present because they're not ex officio, unfortunately. That's not how the charge is written. It just says we should collaborate with members of the school administration, but they weren't officially appointed.
Okay, all right. So I'll make them non-voters.
I can make it as long as Katura doesn't. I just wanted to make sure it was on the record. More importantly. I had no other comments though. So, did you have any comments for me on the joint meeting with school committee?
I didn't see them. That's why I asked a minute ago who did them. So you did those?
Yeah, they were sent on.
I believe you.
Looks like Monday 1/18 at 8:12 p.m. It's in the same email as the agenda.
Okay. I have no comments on them.
Okay. I'm just hesitant to move on because I feel like everything's just so intermingled on the agenda from here on out. So,
So I'm fixing the 10th right now, and I'm going to resend these to you. Okay.
okay.
I got to take draft off. So I'm going to take the draft off too now. So, Greg, who does school committee minutes?
Pam Roberts does the minutes for Northborough and Southborough. And for the regional, we have a citizen who attends the meetings and takes the minutes.
So that's probably quite a job these days, especially.
And then for subcommittee meetings, we usually assign, obviously, a member of the subcommittee similar to this meeting.
Hi,
Hi,
everyone.
Katura.
I'm so sorry. I don't know why I thought it was 7:30. I was sorry.
No problem at all. So, Katura, I have called the meeting to order. Kathy and I have exchanged our edits on the meeting minutes. So you drafted November 5th. I assume you have no edits to those.
No edits.
Kathy is going to send around November 19th, so we are not going to vote on those tonight. She has completed December 10th, and those were distributed this afternoon. I don't know if you had a chance to look at those ones.
They came to me at 5:48, and I have not had a chance to look at them. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. So we will hold those. And did you have a chance to look at the January 13th minutes that were circulated on Sunday?
Let me see. I believe I did, and those looked good.
Okay.
Yep. Yes.
The only changes we made, just so you know, were purely administrative in terms of removing the town seal because there was an issue with how the town clerk was scanning them for ADA compliance, and just referring to Greg and Keith as non-voting because they aren't officially appointed as ex officio. So just being consistent with how the charge is on the town's website. So,
Okay. Fine.
So I will move that we accept the November 5th and January 13th meeting minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
No.
All right. Roll call. Cook,
Aye.
Martin,
Aye.
and Malinowski is aye. Let's go to standing updates. So, Greg, I know we were all on the school committee last week where you mentioned the MSBA in the statement of interest. Is there anything else relevant there that we should be aware of?
No new information. We're just waiting to get more, to learn more about the timeline when the window will open. And
Okay.
Keith is checking in on a regular basis.
Okay.
Yep, that's correct. I had a conversation with MSBA probably 2 weeks ago, and they are still going through the 2020 applications and haven't set yet their 2021 application deadlines.
Okay. School committee feedback, unless there was anything covered outside of the discussion that we were all part of last week. Is there anything else, Katura?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the most recent discussion.
Okay. And then from a capital planning perspective, we did get a readout in late December from the town's architect that had walked both schools. There was clearly a lot of work done around Woodward on the back end once he had kind of seen what would be required to start moving things around in Neary, if that was the school, if there was any sort of decommissioning. And I think I'd say we got a lot of useful feedback of what the potential uses are, what the capacity could be. There was a lot of what I'll call very specific items on building code, and how many people based on how the septic is designed and based on assembly versus what we call mixed use. I'm happy to circulate that document if it becomes relevant to any of you, but I think capital planning is safe to say is waiting for this committee and school committee to see where we're going to go now that the NESDEC report's in our hands. So I guess any questions on that?
What was the synopsis of how the building could be used and what kind of changes would need to be made? Do you mind just?
Yeah.
And I'm happy to read the document if that's better, but.
I'm happy to give a synopsis. So big picture, and Kathy, feel free to add. The building would accomplish almost all of the town's known needs, both for office space, like for example, if we had to move superintendent's office, but also seniors, recreation, and many other departments that we haven't even surveyed in terms of what their needs are, but there's a lot of space. The key is you can't just make it an assembly only building, and it's probably too big to just be an office only building. It's going to be some sort of mixed use. So you wouldn't make it into like a recreation center only. Now it's a 70,000 square foot built, right? Like that would be a lot for a town of, but the expectation, at least that I have, is that if that became available to the town, there's going to be very little expense that goes into that building to make it town ready. The only expense that I can foresee is anything you're carrying on your school capital plan for HVAC, roofs, the things that just you need a building to run, but not particular to operations. May they have to put up a few walls or something like that? Probably. But the next step would be doing like a user feedback of like basically space needs of what does council on aging need? What does recreation need? But we've obviously not going to go down that path until, we know that that's actually in play. And obviously there's a lot of work to do to even know that that's in play and a lot of decisions that would have to be made.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That's helpful.
Kathy, anything to add?
Yeah, so Jason, what he just said, Katura, is Jason's opinion, his personal opinion. I've talked to a few people since then who disagree with that as far as what would have to be done in that building. So I don't think we should assume yet you don't have to spend a reasonable amount of money to basically repurpose that school for what we think it's going to be. So let's just leave that kind of as an open thing and not one that it looks like we've made that determination at this point, because
I think that's the architect's opinion.
Yeah,
so
the people I've talked to actually are pretty knowledgeable, and they started going, what about this? And I went, oh. So I'm just saying, let's just, it's Jason's opinion. Now, I don't have an opinion other than I'm not as convinced as he is that there won't be money spent on it. He was definitely not encouraging us to move into Neary as the non-school building. That's for sure. For that, he was pretty clear about that because of all the work that would need to be done to make it appropriate for office space, et cetera. So he definitely focused on Neary staying as a school and didn't spend a lot of time on that one, and Woodward being everything else.
Okay. Thank you.
With that, let's go to detailed discussion and feedback on the NESDEC presentation from last week. So I guess the way I was thinking of the rest of the meeting, and before we kind of launch into anything in detail, wanted to get everyone's feedback on structure, was thought we would start with kind of what changes or what questions we have for Dr. Kennedy, other than the obvious preschool question that was very well noted in the actual school committee conversation, and trying to get some of this data in Excel, and then pivot to even if there are some changes that come out of ongoing questions that we have for Dr. Kennedy, where do we go? Like what does this committee do to go back to the school committee and start to chart some path forward. May not be a definitive path, but either start ruling things out or ruling things in as potential options. Does that work from a structure perspective?
That sounds fine to me.
Okay. So I guess, Kathy, I'll let you go first. Anything you want to raise that you didn't raise last week, that now that we've had another week with the report, for discussion or feedback?
Yeah, so Greg, can you add these two to your list when you do get Dr. Kennedy on the phone? These are both, I think, nothing more than cosmetic, but I saw them as we went through the report the first time, so other people are going to see it too. And I just don't want someone to question the integrity of the report because they see a couple things that clearly don't make sense. Okay, so on page 17 of the report, the column, so there's two lines there, 2000, 2010. So 2010, you go across to under the column that says percent units renter occupied. That's clearly a math error on the 2010 line. It should be 11% instead of 24%.
So it's
in other words, that column and the one that's to the left should add up to 100%, and it does. The first one does, the top line does, but that one doesn't. So the math is it's 11% and not 24. So they just got a math error in that cell.
Okay.
Then, if you go to the page, and where did it go? That shows the number of permits in Southborough historically, and he
22?
separates them. Excuse me?
22?
I've got to find it, Jason, so it could be. Yes, so 22, where at far right, he's got single family and multi-units. Well, I don't know where Madison Place is in this. Madison Place permit was 2015. And even if he was going to call that one, the one's not there. So I don't know where Madison Place is in the multi-unit column. I don't think anything else is missing. It's just that one is obvious. So I'd like to understand where the permit for that one ended up. So again, these two things are cosmetic, but I'd still like to know. Changing or fixing the pre-K is certainly the most important of the things that should be changed. So my third one was that. So that's what I've got as far as changes I'd like to see in the report before we call it final. Anybody disagree with that? We should change those?
No,
two?
I think those are valid questions or changes in the first example. The math just doesn't work.
Yeah.
I think that's a good catch with the Madison Place too. Where is that? So
I have page 17 and page 22. Okay.
Yeah. And I don't know, Greg, whether under multi-units on 22, he should be putting the number of apartments, or, he says permit, and you only, they pulled one permit, at least then. Later on, they actually pulled another permit. So I don't know because to me, saying one for all those apartments doesn't tell you a whole lot. But anyway, whatever they mean there, just make it right as far as Madison Place.
All right.
Tara?
yes. I asked my questions last week. I don't really have any additional questions based on the presentation or anything. I think he just went over the information and kind of clarified a couple of things. I did have one question before the presentation and then he answered it. It was something about birth rate, because the birth rate chart on one page stopped, several years ago. But then that was actually included later on in the presentation. So I'm good.
My comment that I did not, I asked a few questions during the session, obviously. My only comment that I didn't ask that I wished I had asked was they obviously relied all on census data, right? And I've never researched this well enough to know how accurate census data really is, but I know, given I just got it in my mailbox this week, the town clerk obviously has a lot of data too. And I was curious why at the bare minimum, there's no like comparison, or just check against that just to make sure, right? Like, I don't know if there's something in our demographic, for example, in Southborough, that causes people to reply more or less to the census and make it more or less reliable. I don't know the answer, but I was hoping that either they could say why they don't look at that data, or they did look at it and it was similar. And if they haven't looked at it, then I would suggest at least this subcommittee request it from Mr. Haggerty, and see what it shows for current school, like see how it kind of maps out for current school aged children, the best they can tell from the data that exists. Or if Dr. Kennedy has a way to do that, it's obviously the preferred method, but just as a sanity check, because the census numbers just seem a lot lower than what the town reports. And I know that there's probably a reason behind that.
I agree with everything you said.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
So you think the town's reporting less than what's on here, or more? I didn't know that. I thought the overall numbers look right.
The problem is it's every 10 years too, right?
Yeah.
I just like having applied for grants before and stuff, like I always feel like you end up in, I don't know if this happens to you, Greg and Keith, but like I feel like you always end up in the category below where you actually think your real population is when you start looking at 2010 census data. And obviously this town had Madison Place, but and a few other subdivisions, but it's not like there's been a building boom in Southborough, for example, for the last 10 years.
That's right, because there's no more room here.
Yeah.
So that's actually an interesting thought, Jason, because I think it's funny because as you're talking, I'm realizing that I think what I assumed is that they were relying on some sort of interim town information, but maybe not. I mean, I don't know how they come up with those, with the estimates for the non-official census years, federal census. So that would be good to know.
I mean, it's clear they place heavy emphasis on birth rate. And I would be surprised if they did that comparison to consensus. So it's a good question to ask.
Okay.
Well, and that actually does bring me to, Jason, do you mind if
Go right ahead.
I have had a question kind of rolling around in my head, and maybe I'll try and explain it, and maybe we can ask about this too, Greg, which is that they do place a heavy emphasis on birth rate, but our town, I think most of the people I know moved here. They didn't come here and then have their kids, and then those are the kids that are going to school. Like there's a huge number of people who, and when you look at class sizes, like kindergarten class sizes next to birth rate, it doesn't really necessarily correlate at all to what the birth rate
So he's
was.
not just relying on birth rate. He clearly is relying on their premise that one of the drivers and the projected growth is that you've got all these baby boomers that are going to get rid of their big houses, and the people who are going to buy those houses are from out of town and they have kids. So it's not just birth rate, it's people moving into those houses too. Right.
So I guess I just, there was so much talk about birth rate, but then I think what I was looking for was maybe some more confirmation of how they're accounting for that. And maybe apparently that's with the real estate numbers and the, the sales and all of that. I guess it all ties together, but
well, all you got to do is look at 2016 birth year. And 103 projected births, or I guess actual war births, but he's got 168 going into kindergarten that year.
Right.
No, those are 4-year-olds right now. Like that's next year's, that's 1 year out, right, essentially.
Is he also taking into account, do you know, Greg, for that particular year, the people who held their kids from kindergarten? Because that's a really high, no. Okay.
That's 15, right?
Yep. And the 168.
Oh, right.
168 is very high.
Yeah, that's really high.
That's about, I would say 50 students more than what we're anticipating.
Yeah.
I think that was the question I had asked during the session, right? So when, Greg, when I should know this, but I don't. when will you have at least initial of who registers for next year?
Well, we're opening up kindergarten registration shortly. Typically, we'll have a good idea in April for the most part.
Okay.
Okay, now, wait a minute, go back to what you just said. I thought that 21, 22 will reflect the fact that people held their child out of kindergarten for 2021. That's not true?
What?
That there is a bump in 21, 22 because of kids that would have started the previous year, but got held
But
back.
that's not the reason for the bump on the chart. So the people who held their kids, it would be a bump in addition to the 168. Is that what you're saying?
And we know that for a fact that he hasn't picked up a bump because of COVID and holdbacks.
Yeah, because I don't think this is, I mean, these were not interviews with families and parents, and so no.
But they were well aware of the impact of COVID on kindergarten enrollment.
I will clarify, but I'm pretty positive it does not.
But to the best of your knowledge, Greg, and obviously this is subject to confirmation in April, you think that 168 is high?
Oh, extremely.
And why do you think they, Greg, specifically?
Well, if you look at our projected enrollment, you look at the 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds in our programming that we have now in preschool, in comparison to prior years. I'm talking about actual enrollments. Again, it's about 20% higher than what we're anticipating.
So I'm surprised he didn't talk to you about that one because it's so close, and you could have said to him what you just said to us. Because that 168 rolls all the way through those numbers, it goes 174, 180, 175. So they stay in all the way through 8th grade.
It's 2 classrooms, right? For 12 years, 13 years.
Mm-hmm.
If it's 2 classrooms too high, maybe. But I think obviously Greg knows what he needs to we need to get Dr. Kennedy's arms around that number, and obviously before any major decision would be made, I think we would have clarity on whether that 168 holds or not.
I wish I had the just looking for the prior NASDAQ report.
I have it. Hang on.
I've got it because I did some numbers with this, so I've got it here. So what do you want to see in the prior one?
What was the FY22 projection for kindergarten?
I think I see it as 144.
It's interesting.
I'm looking at the
What are you
I'm
looking
looking at the 10/30/19
Yep.
report, and you're talking about for the school year 21-22, right?
Correct.
166, so barely moved.
Hmm.
But they also had 151 for this year.
Well, maybe in a normal year, it would have been closer to that. I don't know.
And Greg, I have a number of 20 in my head. What is that? Like 20 families that were eligible but didn't choose to send?
Yeah, that is our projection.
Okay.
So Greg, are people, I know the deadline's coming, but are people already applying to kindergarten right now? It's not like they have to wait. They could do it right now?
Correct. It's open enrollment. So
And so it's part of what you're saying.
It opened last week, Kathy.
So is part of what you're saying based on what you've seen thus far?
yeah, just from our projected enrollment this year, 2021, in kindergarten, we believe that around 15 to 20 families held their children out of kindergarten as a result of the pandemic and plan on enrolling their children in 21, 22.
And when you say our projections, so you're doing a separate projection from what NASDAQ gives you.
For this particular data point, yes.
Right, because births were 10 more in 16 than 15. So that might give you 10 more, right?
Yep.
And then 20 from the holdbacks, that's 30, which would be 134, which is not 168.
I'm just going back through the numbers again.
Because remember the timeline, Kathy, right? Is enrollment would have been done by the time we actually understood what COVID was last year, right? That's why the numbers are probably pretty good that Greg's giving us of like who was registered and then backed out, probably, right?
Exactly.
Although there are families who, I mean, it might be a little low. It might be a little low, honestly, because I know that summertime is a popular time for moving, and the real estate market was really hot. So I'm guessing there could have been some families who moved in and, because of everything going on, just never registered.
It's potential.
But you see where I got my number, I took the 104 from this year and I added on 10 because of the difference in birth rates between 15 and 16, then added on 20. So it's still quite a bit less than the 168 that's here.
All right. Well, I think that seems like the big outlier, right? When we look at that year's, and then you're right, that carries through. But the rest of the numbers don't seem to have those big swings.
Well, you get up to 161 4 years later, 1, 2, 3,
Yep.
4 years later. So it does go back up to 161. But the rest of them are, 140 to 150.
Yeah.
I mean, the only way we would reach that number, in my mind, is if we had real estate sales, as he discussed, these houses being sold with multiple bedrooms and kids moving in and kindergartners moving in. But even again, that's a lot of houses with that demographic of family moving in with kindergartners.
Right.
And the other thing that I think is Southborough is not a community where it's a place where families, start buying their first home in many circumstances.
Well, that's kind of what I was saying with the birth rate, right? Like, I mean, people, they have their kids and then they move where they want to have basically good schools and, not be in the city or whatever.
But it is true. There have been people that have moved in recently that came out of Cambridge and Boston, et cetera. And so our prices look pretty good to them. So there may be, there's a few of those. I don't know how many, but there's definitely a few of those that has taken place.
Yeah.
It is what it is.
But I think, so maybe, well, I don't know. I mean, I feel like any of those like that one outlier year, even though, or maybe, and then the 3 years later where the kindergarten class is projected to be 161, the totals over to the right of K to 8 or pre-K to 8, kind of follow a pattern there, because there are other grades where it's slightly lower. So I think it balances out. It's not like it makes the whole thing like that 1 year off or anything.
So I'll follow up. I'll ask John a few more questions about that number.
Okay. So what I would suggest as we move on to, I had put together just literally looking at the old report, for feedback here of, what are the possible iterations? And I think while we all know that there's probably likely some changes coming to this, I would suggest that as we go through this and we either zero in on, non-starters, like both maybe from an educational, or you need to go do some educational policy review, Greg, or, things you want to think about, but at least accept these numbers for purposes of modeling to develop a model and get it sort of in place. And then it's very easy on the fly, right? If this number gets dropped down, right, and they give us a new set of data, we'll kind of know, all right, well, that dropped 3 classrooms in this year, and it eliminated this, we didn't have room for a music room, or we didn't have room for an art room, or we're one classroom too much at Finn, or, vice versa. So I had sent around a Word document. Do you want me to project it? Does everyone have it on their screen? That's what I was planning to drive the conversation. So any preference?
I have it on my screen, but I'm happy, whatever you want.
I have it open on my screen as well.
I don't, so project it, please.
All right. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. So I figured we should start with what are the possible outcomes, right? Obviously, we're not going to land an outcome for a while, but knowing what we know to date, we know that these numbers, while they're higher than probably what we had been working with and what the current enrollment is, even if they're perfect, they still don't get you back to 04 levels, right? So, we're kind of boxed into at least a range at this point. And I think a lot is going to potentially come down to configuration. So I came up with 3 options. I'll just kind of outline, what the capital investment would be, depending on the option you choose. And just make sure that we all agree with those are really the 3 paths, or right, in Couture, this is particularly important to you in the school administration, right? When you, as a school committee, ultimately vote on this, right, is there anything else you would want to be presented with? So my first option was close Neary, we know, and consolidate to Finn, Woodward, and Trotter, which would mean that from the school side, you would have kind of your ongoing capital plan, but you wouldn't have a big building project. But on the town side, we'd likely have some sort of building project, either buy an existing building and do a complete gut to serve the town needs, or to redo or build a new building to serve all the other needs we're trying to solve for. Scenario 2 is pretty much just flipping Neary and Woodward and consolidating to Finn, Neary, and Trotter. This would obviously mean either a massive renovation or construction of Neary while maintaining Finn and Trotter. And then the town would have the ongoing maintenance of Woodward. And I put the word light remodel to Woodward, Kathy. We can, I guess, refine that over time for town needs.
Jason, why are you bringing Trotter into this?
I just think it's important you have 4 schools now, right? I'm not suggesting a change to Trotter in any of these 3 scenarios, though. But I just think it's important I'm fine removing it.
No,
but I do think,
but clearly, and I've asked several times, both Keith and Greg have said they don't think Trotter should have a grade added to it. So keep going.
Right. And we'll talk about that down in scenarios, right? Because that was one of the scenarios, a while ago. And then obviously, we may get to a point here where we say we need to maintain all 4 schools. But what that would mean is obviously both the town and the schools have probably very high capital expenditures if they think that both needs are equally important and don't stagger or phase them or scale back the current requests, right? So that's obviously your worst financial scenario without even putting any numbers on a piece of paper, because it would mean 2 large capital projects as opposed to, probably 1 to 1.5 capital projects. I added this asterisk, and I would welcome feedback, but it just, as I was pulling it together, was obviously, if you close one of the 2 schools, Finn or Neary, and a mistake happened, right? Town, someone found a piece of land that you can build on that no one thought you could build on, sort of thing. I do think you have the potential for addition at Finn, it would obviously come at the sacrifice of some of the recreational space, but we're obviously going to have land elsewhere if one of these schools were closed. So I just throw that out there that that's kind of what I, at least in my head, am viewing as your flex option, that if you cut it too close or you're like a couple of classrooms too short, at any one point in time, that facility in particular would lend itself to, a light addition versus a whole building. So I'm going to pause there. I don't know if you want to go around the horn or how anyone wants to react to that, but I figured we should at least zero in on this first before going into next steps. So Greg, do you want to start?
Yeah, so Couture, do you want to go first? Are you happy to share my thoughts first?
I just want to share a preliminary thought, if you don't mind. Thank you. So I guess the thing that I keep coming back to in my head is when we look at the study that was done back in 2012, 2013, the student population. So the conclusion of that was that we could close a school if we, we just had it open and now I'm losing it. We could close a school as of 2016, 2017, assuming that the student population was down to, I think it was like 11. So it was I lost my thing. I lost my page. But anyway, at a very low level that is significantly lower than any of the projections that we have. So I'm just trying to understand how we're approaching this in terms of, because Jason, you just referenced, it's nowhere, the projections are nowhere near the 2004 levels, and that's true.
I don't agree with that statement, Couture. So let me just interject. So I spent a lot of time going back to, I started in 2002. The biggest population year was 2004, 2005. If you include pre-K, which I did it both with just K through 8 and pre-K through 8. So again, trying to make sure I always compared apples to apples. So the pre-K 8 population in the largest year was 1632. The projections here are 1463 in the next to last year, as far as the biggest one here. I mean,
wait, say that again, Kathy. I'm sorry. Say that again so I can follow you looking at numbers. What was that?
So the biggest population we had since we built the fourth school was 1,632 students in the year 2004, 2005, and that includes pre-K.
Okay.
Okay, now we go to.
And that's pre-K to 8?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I backed out. I backed out. I know that the data that we had attached to the study included Algonquin. I backed Algonquin out of this, okay? All right, then we go to the current study, right? And we look at the biggest year they're projecting, and that's 1482 in 2029-30.
Right.
Okay, so you put that in there, so that's 1482.
Uh-huh.
Then you say, okay, we've got to at least have a cushion here. We've got to allow for this to be somewhat off. And then we've got to do something about considering what Park Central does this town. So I think if you do both of those and put a cushion on the upside in there, you don't get that far away from 1632. So then I took the 1482 and I looked at what that would mean to Finn and Neary as far as what we thought were the two most realistic configurations. That is, put 1 grade at Finn or put 4 at either Neary or Woodward. And the increase in school population from what it is today by doing that is enormous. I don't think there's room to do either one of those. So I don't know if we want to talk about that first and see if we think that that is right. And if it is, I'm not sure that we almost don't have a conclusion right now that we can risk closing a school. If the group in 2013 had the numbers we have right now, they clearly would have recommended not closing a school. They wouldn't have even said we could. They would have said we couldn't, and they wouldn't have. Instead, they said we could, but we're still not going to because we're too concerned about what happens if these numbers are wrong. So I think, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. I guess I was gonna, before reacting to that, Kathy, I just, Katura, if you want, I don't know if you had something else you wanted to add in there, because I have a few thoughts on what Kathy said, and then would welcome Greg's thoughts.
Right. So I think Kathy and I are saying a similar thing, just approaching it from a different standpoint. Because what I was thinking, the way I was approaching it is that the whole report that was done in 2012, 2013 arrived at a conclusion that a school could potentially be closed if the population went down to a certain point, but none of these projections are even remotely near that particular point. So it seems as though unless something major has changed in the last 6 or 7 years about the way the schools operate and the space required to deliver the programs, that, I mean, this, I don't know how much, I mean, I think it does make sense to potentially take a look at the report, see if anything has changed from the analysis then, but it just seems like based on the numbers, it's not necessarily a feasible thing to close a school with no educational impact unless you're replacing the space with something else.
So that's the key point. I think the factor that's different now that didn't exist 8 years ago was NERI.
Yeah.
And well, obviously,
doing something with NERI, is that what you're saying?
NERI is what I would call your flex option, because depending upon what the data tells you, and I looked at the overall numbers, but I focused more on and I didn't model it out because I think that's where I only know enough to be dangerous, but we have educators, joining us, right? But I think you have to look at how these grades would flow in the timing of which, right? Because year by year, that's a critical piece here because, as these grades move through, right, that dictates how fast you have to move. Like if you went the NERI route, right? Like we've talked about MSBA, we've talked about non-MSBA, but until you know where your pinch points are in the grades and how you're going to configure it, you don't know. I agree on premise, right? If you follow the old report, it stands, but the old report never considered a new facility. It considered existing facilities.
That's true. But there's still the space constraint, even though, right? And so, yeah.
Let me just give you a number.
Go ahead, Greg. Sorry, Kathleen. Just let Greg weigh in, and then we'll go to you.
So, I'm not in favor of closing Woodward unless something significant happens to NERI. I think there needs to be an investment. So, I agree with that point, Jason. That the new variable in this equation is, some type of renovation at NERI. I do believe that out of these choices, two, with the caveat that a renovation at NERI, and I do believe NERI could house 3, 4, 5. Finn could house K1, 2. If you look at NERI, you look at the 2 gymnasiums, you look at the band room. There's a lot of space there that is not really used efficiently. That I think a redesign and a remodel, it would feel plenty spacious and actually have some flex space for any capacity changes in the future that we're not anticipating.
This is NERI you're talking about now with the band room space?
Correct. Band, there's the 2 gymnasiums. There's the library in the middle. There's just, central office right now is in that space. There's just a lot of space right now that is not efficiently used, in my opinion.
Can I give you some numbers and see if you still feel the same way?
Sure.
Okay, so NERI right now, 2021 has grades 4 and 5, and that's 252 students today. Okay, if you look at the NASDAQ projections for 2030-31, and we add just one grade, that would change that 253 to 481. Then if you added the 4th grade, we did all 4 there, it'd be 636 students. Okay, so you may be right, but based on what you just said, you still believe there's enough students to go from enough room to go from 252 to 481?
With a renovation, yes.
Okay.
But I mean, again, I'm not an architect. But if you look at the office spaces, the central office is utilizing currently, we have 5 classrooms. There's the 2 gymnasiums. There's just a lot of, I think with a renovation, there is opportunity there. And I guess it goes back to my original point that we're talking about scenarios and recommendations. And as Collier's pointed out, the key right now is to get in the queue with MSBA with a statement of interest and then being invited into the MSBA process, because then all of these scenarios come to play in fruition around what if scenarios.
So I think we agree with that as far as what the next critical step is, so that there's no dispute that's what we should do.
Okay.
But I just don't know that MSBA is going to come up with any better numbers than we have here. I mean, what are they going to have that NASDAQ didn't have? Because let me keep going. If you put that extra, so you're okay with NERI going to 41. Finn would go from today 287 to 555 if you added a grade.
Yeah, so I think, sorry, Kathy, can you say that again?
So if you look, and I'm counting pre-K, and I don't know, because of the mistake with pre-K, I assume Southmore had 40 pre-K students right now. So that's
yes,
so assuming 40. So I'm just getting rid of Northborough, right? There's 287 in pre-K through 1 today in Finn. If you looked at the projections for the last year in the NASDAQ projections we just got, and then added 2nd grade, you'd grow that 287 to 555.
And does MSBA come up with its own projections, or do we?
So they would come in and look at projections, but they'd also look at the current space and design as part of the feasibility study of, occupancy of a building, the footprint of a building, how space could be utilized. They make you examine every potential option, from building new to renovating to consolidating. All of the options are on the table. But again, Kathy, I do think that at that ceiling number in the projections, my unexpert guess is we could make that work at Finn. Right now we have Southborough Extended Day. We have we have Southborough Extended Day. We have Northborough Preschool. We have a lot of classrooms being used for OT, PT, some other spaces that are nice to have, but aren't essential. I think there is potential for that to fit within the footprint.
So Greg, is your recommendation then, are you recommending we pause until we see what MSBA says about your statement of interest?
Well, I mean, I guess the real decision when I think about the next step is, does the town want to consider moving forward with a renovation project at Neary without going through MSBA reimbursement? And we haven't done that analysis. If the answer to that question is no, then I think the next, for me, it's a pause. We do the statement of interest for Neary, get in the queue, and again, get accepted into the next step in the process with MSBA.
Where are you at on your facility study?
So Keith had a meeting with Colliers on Thursday, yesterday.
Correct.
And we are, Jason, we are going to look at a couple other vendors just to do our due diligence. So Keith has started that work. We are looking at NESDEC and some of the names, Jason, you provided us that we've used, that people have used in the past.
Okay.
But we at the minimum, we are moving forward with that level of analysis at Neary School.
And I know they'll focus on the physical plant, but, and I actually went back and looked at her notes and I listened to the meeting, so I'm not clear on, are they also going to focus as much on a optimal floor plan for each building? So you really could see how many students could fit within our parameters as far as classroom size that we feel is ideal, et cetera. Or is that part of what they're going to do? Or is that kind of secondary to the, you know, what shape the roof is in, what shape the HVAC's in, what shape the electrical's in?
That would be secondary.
So this is just my personal opinion, is I think both options with and without MSBA have to be on the table until you do the math, right? To say, because to me, I'd like to understand what's the cost of going without MSBA and what does that do to your time? We all know it's gonna be a lot quicker, right? Without MSBA, we all know that the cost is likely gonna be more from a gross perspective, right? In terms of total principal, but the actual project will cost less. It's just, it's going to cost the town. It's going to cost the town more because you don't have a reimbursement without MSBA. But an MSBA design building, I assume, because of the process you have to go through, is going to cost us more in general. But obviously you have the reimbursement factor. So the reason I think not only doing that financial modeling is important, but also looking at what these numbers do in this, like Kathy, I know you were throwing out total numbers and Finn total, like look at where your pain points are, because I think that answers a critical question is, how fast do you need to move? Like, can you wait 5 years? Or is this a decision that should have already been, started on 2 years ago, but we didn't have the ability to do it, or we didn't have the same needs back then, or the same projections, et cetera? Because timing, I think, is going to be critical to how you educate and make a decision, absent the financial numbers.
So Jason, I'm not quite following that train of thought. So can you clarify, if we assume at least that we're going to assume for now the population is going up, right? Not down, based on this, right? You're assuming that.
Yeah.
Then I don't know what you mean by we should have done this 5 years ago.
Well, so we heard feedback that when you submit to MSBA, you should expect to get a no your first go around, and you may get a no year 2 and year 3, and then even once you're in the process, it's another 270-day process once you're in there, and then we all know what it takes to then get through a town meeting, and then get to a shovel in the ground, and then you add 15 to 18 months for construction from there. So what I'm saying, Kathy, is you can't assume when MSBA would entertain your request, right? There's so many factors that are just outside of this town's control and the administration's control, right? They may say, yes, day one, or they may put us off for many years because of whoever else is in front of us. So if we had started years ago, naturally, you obviously would have had time on your side because you would have been in the queue for a while, right? We're not in the queue yet. We're hopefully going to be in the queue soon. So if this thing gets delayed 3-4 years before you actually make a decision and put a shovel in the ground, by the time, let's just say you went with a new NERI and not a renovation, by the time that building is actually erected, you're getting very close to the years that we're saying we have, space constraints based on the current facilities, not to mention the amount of capital that will have to go into maintaining these facilities to be safe in the interim.
Not to mention your study's 5 years out, and so you've only got a projection of 3 or 4, 5 years at that point to rely on.
Yeah, I'm sure you would re-up it at that point. I'm sure you would then project out again, and I'm sure the numbers will go down, and it'll, this is probably an endless cycle, but I'm just trying to figure out, is there an ideal timing? Because, right, there is a point, a time where also the town moves forward with whatever they decide, right? Like, we can only, we don't control necessarily, if a group brings an article to town meeting, right?
Yeah,
to
I
do
think
something.
Jason, I think your point is a good one. What would be the timeline if all things played out as we would hope in terms of submitting an SOI to the 280-day to shovels in the ground to opening up a new building? I think it's important to have that, what is the quickest timeline if we meet all those benchmarks and we get in the queue. I think that is important. The challenge is you should, in that theory, you always should be in the queue, right? You should always be submitting statements of interest.
And I'm not saying you should have been, right? Because I think the town would have been like, we just built a new public safety building. Building a new school now, right? And what if you had been accepted, right?
Yeah. Well, that's the challenge.
Yeah.
If you get accepted, you need to be ready. You need to be ready to move or decline and get back in line.
So the two things I think the 5 of us are in agreement on are that absolutely we should do the statement of interest as soon as you can this spring. Get it in. You don't have to be specific. Just get it in there so we're in the queue, so that when the time comes to talk to us, we're there, right? So I think everybody agrees with that. I don't see any downside to that. And then the second thing is, and this is a very general statement, is NERI's going to have some money spent on it one way or the other. Whatever we decide, NERI's going to have money spent on it.
So another way to look at it too is, I think Collier's mentioned this. We haven't submitted a statement of interest in, almost a little under, 2 decades. So it's prime for consideration. Let's say that we get invited in and we start the 280-day process and our project still doesn't get accepted into MSBA. That is a great place for the town to be in, to say, hey, we're going to fund it and we're going to move forward with it. And we're just the funding mechanism is going to be different than what we had anticipated.
Yeah, because all the legwork will be done at that point, right?
Yeah, because all the same work needs to be done regardless of the pathway you take. It's just, if we can get in the queue and start that feasibility study as soon as possible, then we have the legwork and the data to move forward in any direction.
In the feasibility study the time period for that is 270 days?
Yeah, it's 280 days, and that's, that's from funding, funding the town, getting funding from the support from the town. It's all the steps.
So you've got 280 days to come up with to complete a feasibility study.
And come up with a decision and a proposal for MSBA to consider funding.
So go ahead. Sorry, Greg.
So the feasibility study will look at all of these options. It will look at, new build. It will look at other properties in the community that we haven't considered. It will weigh the most cost efficient and the best programmatic project. And that is the project that we would then bring forth for a vote with MSBA to approve for funding. And that's architectural. That's all the details.
So step one, I think, like Kathy said, we all agree on, and Greg and Keith are well armed to move forward on the statement of interest. I think step two is once that's submitted and you hear back, right, with a go, no go, right, they either accept you or they don't, right? They accept you, then obviously, Greg, there's a series of steps that the town would then continue to move down. If they say no, then I think there is a decision point there of, does the town wait another year? Or do we start doing feasibility on our own, knowing that that piece would never be reimbursed by MSBA, even if we did get accepted in the future? Right, and like basically, when do you want to start the clock in ticking? But I think the important part to that, and Kathy, this is mostly directed at you, is like, what is the cost of doing everything else the town wants to do from a capital perspective? And is that the sum of that cost equal to or less than the delta for what MSBA would fund versus not fund? Like, i.e., trying to move some of this towards the interest rate environment we're in. Now, I don't think we're going to hit it, probably because of the timing, but I think that's what the financial modeling will tell, right? And I think what I'm hearing here tonight is possible outcome number one just doesn't seem possible, which would be close, nearing, consolidate to Finn, Woodward, Trotter, like based on if we accepted NASDAQ's report as it is, which then really narrows you down to 2 and 3.
And Jason, you say that because?
All the comments you and Kentara made about the total population. Now, I firmly believe, and I'm happy to do as much of this as I can, but obviously I'm going to need input from others, is I do think we should show why that would be eliminated. But like where the pain point is, like, for example, if you put all those numbers on a piece of paper and you show you need 10 more classrooms at Finn in a given year than the building actually has, like, it just becomes obvious to people why you didn't go down that path, as opposed to using totals. Like, I thought the prior report was, like, when I went back through it again after getting this NASDAQ report, it's pretty persuasive of what the educational limitations would be to cramming any one of these configurations 1 through 4 that you see at the bottom that they had previously into the building in any year, if you trust the NASDAQ report.
Say that one more time. Say that again.
Which part?
Just what you just now said, the cramming part.
Like, if you look at the old report done by the prior study committee, they clearly said, hey, you have if you have this population for these grades in this school in this year, you're going to lose all these programming space, right? In some cases, it was like you lose a non-essential room. In some cases, it was you lose 6 classrooms. You may have trailers, or you have no band room, or this or that. It became painfully obvious which configurations were feasible and not feasible back at that time. Here, I just think we're playing from what I'll call as a different, the position of strength is, if you really are focused on a near construction project, that's your flex, right? And you still have flex at Finn if you really ever needed it. But I'm not advocating going down that road, but you still have an insurance policy and you're not backing yourselves into a corner in any way, shape, or form.
Okay, so now I understand what you mean by your flex. I guess it should have been obvious. So you're just saying the reason 1 doesn't work most likely is because you don't have the flex at Woodward. There's no place to expand Woodward. That's what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
And we've heard from Greg that Trotter really shouldn't be considered from an educational perspective for anything other than 6 through 8. So that kind of leaves that building off limits unless there's space issues there, which I don't see.
I also thought we voted that Trotter was basically off the table, or we
Exactly.
were really
No, exactly.
talking about Woodward and Neary anyway.
Exactly, Katara.
I also think number one, under the scenarios of possible outcomes, it sort of doesn't it defeat the purpose a little bit with what the town is trying to accomplish, which is find space for all these other things.
It absolutely is.
No, because Nary would then be used for that too, with a lot of money spent.
Oh, I see.
So
Or you tear down Neary and you build whatever you need to build, right?
I see. Okay.
But I do think we need to answer the question why Neary isn't best suited for that. Based on obviously what the town's capital site has seen from, it would take a full gut of the building, right, to do anything. And obviously the schools, desire, right, like obviously the campus approach, right, like that doesn't come at, there's no financial dollar you put against that, maybe other than the busing costs and some other considerations I'm sure you'll think about operationally, but there's some financial factors that weigh in here too.
Yeah. Okay.
So Greg, would you have any appetite, and I just need you to be brutally honest with us, to look in maybe we don't do 4 configurations, but just put pencil to paper with us. Again, we're happy to do legwork, but we just need your educational team to weigh in of, like, if we follow NESDEC's report and we follow any one of these configurations as currently built, where your pain points are. Like, I don't know that that's a lot of work, but you tell me what you think.
Yeah, we actually for examining increased in-person learning in this pandemic, we're working on with a Canon design on a tool that allows us to kind of look at projections and space. And so we actually have all of our schools in that, and Keith has been working with Canon on this. So it actually is something that Keith, I'm thinking we could share with Jason and partner with Jason and Kathy around looking at future modeling. Looks like bathroom size and number of students and number of spaces in a building, what the maximum capacity would be given certain constraints.
Yeah, it'd have that flexibility to use. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
But I still don't understand why we have the configurations, Jason, why you've used the configurations you have at the bottom.
I took them straight, look at the caveat, directly from the 2013 report, open for consideration of additional scenarios and candidly feedback from the educate. I just literally took copy and paste. I personally, based on everything I've heard, think configuration 3 is the only one we've really talked a lot about. Or maybe right, configuration 1, was ruled out essentially, but from an educational perspective. In configuration 2, if you're already saying we're close on Fin for pre-K through 2 in any one year, right? It just doesn't seem like you would be able to fit 4 grades there essentially. And I don't know, Greg, we've never talked about configuration 4. That's basically 2 elementary schools, but simultaneous grades.
The town really did not want neighborhood schools before, so I'm not sure we should even have that listed.
So does everyone agree that this scenario is an absolute must to model with the tool?
3. Yes, although, well, let me, because Trotter stays the same. Greg, when you were saying earlier about putting the grades in different buildings, were you contemplating pre-K through 2 at Finn, or pre-K would be elsewhere?
No, pre-K through, I think it would be continue to be an early childhood center, just adding grade 2.
Okay.
I think from a programmatic standpoint, part of the work around closing a building is really consolidating grade levels and maximizing staffing and resources. So having a pre-K 2 and a 3 through 5 programmatically and fiscally makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So I just don't know why we would consider A, B, or D. I understand, Jason, where you got it, but back then we thought the population was going down. We don't anymore, so I just think that takes A, B, and D off the table. D for a different reason.
Well, A is definitely off the table, right? Because we're not moving grade 5 to Trotter.
And I don't think you can add 2 grades to Finn and B.
Right.
Yeah, I think C, configuration 3 is if you think of the majority of our time over these meetings, this is what our conversations have come back to each time.
Yeah. Okay. I think nothing saying you can't add one later, but I think to focus, right, and to make the best use of everyone's time, that makes a lot of sense to me. My question is, do we not model 3 through 5 both in existing Woodward and existing Neary, or do we strike Woodward and just put Neary? Because that goes back up to, do you strike option 1, or is that still potentially in play?
I think you've got to do both, Jason, and I'm thinking ahead about the presentation you make to the town. I don't think you can just go into this and just assume that it's Neary that survives as a school and not Woodward, even though we do know there's, as you just said, there's other reasons to do that. But I just think because Woodward's so much newer that you're going to get a lot of questions saying, what do you mean we're closing Woodward as a school?
Yep, no, I'm with you. Okay.
So Greg and Keith, can you put 4 grades at existing Neary?
I don't believe so, no.
So you'd have to add on to Neary to do 4 grades.
That would require a renovation or addition.
Well, I think, yeah, and I think that's where I think the footprint, and with a good architect in the current space, you could, and again, please don't quote me, although I am being recorded.
I know.
I think it is possible, feasible, in a school renovation to actually create that environment.
A renovation or a renovation / addition, like Keith said?
A renovation.
Do you think a total renovation of Neary might get 4 grades?
Yes.
What are you suggesting there, Kathy? Are you going at grade 2?
You got a second configuration. I think you got to do the second one would be 4 grades at, I think you probably couldn't do, well, what? Okay, Greg, can you put 4 grades in Woodward?
No.
Without
Renovation.
without renovating.
Yeah.
So maybe we've got to do configuration 2, which is like 3, except you keep Finn the way it is, and you put 4 grades at Neary.
The 4 grades being 2nd through 5th. 2, 3, 4, 5.
Greg, Keith, thoughts on that?
Is that what you're thinking? Is that what the thought was?
That's what I understood the thought to be, Katura.
With a renovation and using the current Neary footprint. Keith, what is the square footage of Neary again? It's
66,000.
Is there any just general rule of thumb that says this is how much you need per kid per square foot? Is there some great model of how a school should be built that says you need 100 square feet per kid or whatever?
I asked that question, Kathy, and it's all about whether the design that they choose. If it's one of the regular designs that they use, they do have those numbers. I don't know off the top of my head, but they do get down to a square footage number per pupil.
And if you look at Lincoln Street School as an example too,
That's what I was going to say. Good idea.
They did end up, their addition was a gymnasium. And then the gymnasium became a combination of the former gymnasium became a combination of classroom space and library. So they did end up adding classrooms as a result of their project, but again, they had the gymnasium as an addition.
So Jason, I didn't mean to spoil all this as far as you're starting on this. It's just, I had already done these numbers. I went, oh my gosh, they're going to say we can't do this. So I really thought, I didn't think that Greg and Keith were going to say what they did.
Now, what is my, I guess we're going to have to run through, my thinking is we're going to have to run through all these scenarios. We're going to have to demonstrate a case of why each of these is not feasible or not programmatically sound. I think that will be the work that we do. And that's what MSBA makes you do in its process.
So far, I've heard two reasons to possibly consider this, not considering the fact that the town could use some extra space, but the two just looking at schools would be that you believe that one less transition is much better for children.
Mm-hmm.
Ideally, from a programmatic standpoint, I think, you have pre-K 1 to, second graders are still learning how to read, the types of supports they need are more, it's still that early childhood domain. So programmatically, I think that makes a lot more sense than 2, 3, 4, 5. That becomes more like a kind of a standard traditional elementary school. And then from an educator standpoint, it's pre-K 1, 2 in one building, transitioning to a 3, 4, 5.
So I think the first reason is you think there's a better configuration of grades education-wise. That's what you just said. Second, correct. We know we've got to spend money on NERI if it's going to be open as a school, period. It's 50 years out. It's got to have money spent on it. And therefore, since we've got to spend money on it, we considered the fact that we might be able to close the school at the same time. So I think that helps people understand why we did this. And then third, and it may not be as important, but it does seem to, it makes it more of a campus there like it is now versus closing Woodward, which is on its own next to the public safety building.
All right. So Keith, I don't know, I think timing around this determines timing of a next meeting, unless anyone else has other thoughts around this tonight. So I don't know like where you're at with that system. I forget, you just referred to it as like how easy or quickly this could be done. Is it a 1 week exercise, 3 week exercise, 2 month exercise? You want to think about that and let me know. We can coordinate a date. You don't have to answer on the fly if you're not comfortable yet.
No, yeah, because we're still learning how to use it and what its capabilities are. In fact, Greg and I were playing around with it prior to the meeting, just trying to get acclimated. We are going to be meeting with the engineer tomorrow at noon. Greg, by the way, that did get confirmed. So, we need to learn it a little more. I think if I become more comfortable with it, then I'd be able to get back to you, Jason, and say, yeah, okay, it would be a week project or a 2 week project, but we are connecting to our reopening of the buildings for more in-person learning. So
I'd much rather you focus on that.
I figured you would. Yeah. I think Kurtura would agree.
So Keith, as you talk to Colliers and the other potential contractors as far as the facility study, I mean, I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but it seems to me Colliers would focus on the physical plant more than the space needs. And NASDAQ, since that's their expertise, might focus more on the space in the way education should be versus the physical plant. I'm not sure NASDAQ is going to have a lot to say about the windows and the roof, et cetera. So it's, you might almost need both of their expertises to really come up with, a report that considers both aspects.
Yeah, I think that certainly the combination of Colliers or whatever vendor we're able to use for that assessment, Colliers was interested in the things that we were thinking about, and putting that into their thinking wheel of what would make the most sense to give us the best report for that. Also, certainly NASDAQ is helpful, and MSBA. They are available for consultation at times. I think they're really in a tough spot when it comes to COVID right now and the delayed applications that they have. They're very eager to start working with districts to come up with solutions. So that might be another avenue as well.
And I think a key here that's going to come out of whoever you work with is how long does that Neary roof have, right? That's about a $2 million expense.
It is.
Right. That's going to potentially drive some decisions here, depending upon the quality of it.
That's correct. I mean, it's very tough to put a year on a roof. I know when we have new construction, we could put a warranty on it, but considering the work that's been done, I think we've done a lot to kind of keep it where it is. Our fingers are crossed for nothing major to happen, but that's something that we are rolling the dice with. That's why the district did go for a statement of interest for the roof the last couple of years to make sure it was in the docket.
So I didn't know that.
You didn't? Mm-hmm.
And so obviously we didn't get in the queue.
Correct.
We'd be in the queue, right?
Yeah, for the accelerated program. It's a different program. The core program is the one we're looking at for what we've been talking about tonight, the one that Greg has been referencing. And then the accelerated repair program is the one that roofs and boilers and things of that nature are put in as a one-off to do a quicker type of repair.
And so I think if I'm remembering correctly, did we miss out because it just wasn't quite old enough?
No, that was the Trottier roof.
That was Trottier. Okay.
So we were accepted into, we were invited in for the Neary roof.
Correct.
Or not?
We were
invited.
And we declined as a result of these types of conversations, because again, once you get accepted in, there's a commitment to go through the process and expend some money.
Okay, and I think you guys had told us that, and I forgot about that.
So I had public input timing and options for superintendent in Northborough pre-K financial impact. But I think those are longer term conversations I just wanted to keep on the radar, unless people think that that's at all important to kind of where we go in the next, let's say, month or so.
Fine.
So anything else on next steps?
So are we agreeing the next steps are we need to get the NASDAQ report cleaned up? And Greg needs to have his conversation about especially the 168.
Yes, and simultaneous to that, once Keith feels comfortable with the software, we'll try to work through configuration 3 and 3A to the extent possible. And then depending on how that goes, I'll reach back out to schedule the next meeting.
Great.
And then obviously, Greg, Keith, keep us updated on timing of facility studies once you actually have a vendor on board. With that, I'm going to move to public comment. Is there any public comment? Seeing none. Any business, any other business? All right, I'll move that we adjourn. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Roll call. Cook,
Aye.
Martin,
Aye.
and Malinowski is aye.